fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital buzzed like trapped flies against my skull. I'd been on my feet for 11 hours straight, my scrubs clinging to my back with sweat, my hair escaping its ponytail in damp tendrils that stuck to my neck. The smell of antiseptic and something else, something metallic and final, had long since stopped registering. That's what happens when you work the night shift in labor and delivery. You become numb to everything except the ache in your feet and the hollow growl of your stomach. I was invisible here. To the doctors who barked orders without looking at my face, to the families who saw only the uniform, not the woman wearing it, to the world that had decided long ago that girls like me, poor, unremarkable, forgettable, didn't deserve to be seen. My apartment was a shoebox in the worst part of the city, where sirens sang lullabies and gunshots punctuated the night like exclamation marks. I'd learned to sleep through both. What I couldn't sleep through was the bone-deep exhaustion that came from working double shifts just to keep the lights on, the fear that one missed payment would send me spiraling into homelessness, the crushing weight of being utterly, completely alone. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. I remember because Tuesdays were when they restocked the vending machines, and I'd been fantasizing about those stale cheese crackers for the last 3 hours of my shift. My shift had finally ended at 7 in the morning, and I'd stumbled out of the hospital into the gray dawn, my body moving on autopilot toward the bus stop. I never made it there. The collision wasn't violent, just a gentle bump that sent my purse flying, its contents scattering across the sidewalk like seeds. I'd been looking at my phone, checking my bank account and wincing at the numbers, when I'd walked straight into someone. "I'm so sorry, the words died in my throat. He stood there like a monument to everything I wasn't. Tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders that seemed to block out the weak morning sun. His suit was the kind of black that swallowed light, perfectly tailored to a body that radiated controlled power. But it was his face that stopped my heart. All sharp angles and dark eyes that looked at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle with awareness. Behind him, a black SUV idled at the curb, its windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. A man in a matching suit stood by the rear door, his hand resting on something beneath his jacket. Watching. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low, textured like expensive whiskey, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Italian, maybe. Or something older, something that spoke of Mediterranean nights and dangerous secrets. "No, I'm fine. I dropped to my knees, scrambling to collect my scattered belongings. My wallet with its 3 crumpled dollar bills, my expired bus pass, the tube of cheap lip balm that had rolled into the gutter. He knelt beside me, and the scent of him hit me like a physical force. Cedar and smoke and something darker, something that whispered of boardrooms and backroom deals and blood on marble floors. His hands were elegant, manicured, with a thick gold ring on his right hand that caught the light. A ring with a symbol I didn't recognize but somehow knew meant something. Something important. "Let me help." It wasn't a question. His fingers brushed mine as he handed me my phone, and electricity sparked up my arm. I jerked back, startled by the intensity of the contact, and looked up into his face. Really looked. He was beautiful in the way that predators are beautiful, all lethal grace and coiled strength. His hair was dark, swept back from a forehead that belonged on Roman coins, a scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against tanned skin. And his eyes, God, his eyes, were the color of espresso, deep and hot, and entirely focused on me. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. "Thank you," I whispered, clutching my belongings to my chest like a shield. He stood, offering me his hand. I hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, warm, and when he pulled me to my feet, I swayed slightly, dizzy from exhaustion and something else, something that felt dangerously like attraction. "You work here?" He gestured toward the hospital, his gaze traveling over my wrinkled scrubs, my name tag that read, "Emma, nursing assistant, night shift," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "Just getting off. You look exhausted." There was no judgment in his tone, just observation. "When did you last eat?" The question was so unexpected, so intimate, that I blinked. I don't remember." Something flickered in his eyes. Concern, maybe. "There's a cafe around the corner. Have breakfast with me. It should have been a question, but it wasn't. And I should have said no, should have thanked him and walked away, and caught my bus and gone home to my empty apartment and my empty life. But there was something about the way he looked at me, like I was a puzzle he needed to solve, a lock he intended to pick, like I mattered. I don't even know your name, I said. Dante. He said it simply, as if the name alone should mean something. Behind him, the man by the SUV shifted, his hand moving beneath his jacket. And you're Emma. My heart stuttered. How did you... He gestured to my name tag with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Come. You need food, and I need... He paused, his gaze holding mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. Company. I should have run. Instead, I followed him to the cafe, hyper-aware of the way people moved aside as we passed, of the deference in the barista's eyes when she saw him, of the two men who took up positions at separate tables, their eyes constantly scanning the room. He ordered for both of us, eggs, toast, coffee so rich and dark it smelled like heaven, and we sat in a corner booth where he could see the door. You don't remember me, do you? He asked, watching me over the rim of his cup. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. What? 6 months ago. The hospital fundraiser. You were serving champagne. The memory hit me like a wave. The grand ballroom, the orchestra, the sea of expensive dresses and tuxedos. I'd been one of a dozen servers, invisible in my black vest and bow tie, weaving through the crowd with trays of crystal flutes. And there had been a man, this man, who'd looked at me like he could see through my uniform to the scared girl beneath. I don't. But I did. I remembered. God help me. I remembered the way he'd thanked me, his fingers brushing mine as he took a glass, the way his eyes had followed me across the room all night. You smiled at me, he said softly. Only once. But I remembered. The cafe felt too small suddenly, too warm. Why? Because in a room full of people trying to be seen, you were the only one who didn't care about being invisible. He leaned forward, and the morning light caught the gold in his ring, made the symbol flash. That's a rare thing, Emma. Authenticity. Genuine disregard for the performance. I didn't know what to say to that, so I ate, and he watched me with those dark eyes that seemed to catalog every movement, every breath. We talked, or rather I talked, nervous energy making me babble about my job, my tiny apartment, my non-existent social life. He listened, asking questions that made me feel interesting, important, worth listening to. By the time we finished, the sun had fully risen, and I'd forgotten about being tired. Forgotten about being invisible. Let me drive you home, he said. And again, it wasn't really a question. I should have said no, should have insisted on the bus, but his hand was on the small of my back, warm and possessive, guiding me toward the waiting SUV, and the man with the hidden gun was opening the door, and I was sliding into leather seats so soft they felt like sin. The drive was silent, except for the low hum of the engine and the soft beep of his phone. Several phones, I noticed, each buzzing with messages he glanced at and dismissed. He sat close enough that I could feel the heat of him, smell that intoxicating scent of cedar and danger. When we pulled up to my building, crumbling brick and rusted fire escapes, I felt shame wash over me. This was where I lived. This was what I was. But Dante just looked at me, his expression unreadable. Have dinner with me tonight. I work tonight, I said automatically. Tomorrow, then. His hand reached out, his thumb brushing my cheek in a gesture so tender it made my chest ache. Say yes, Emma. I should have said no. Yes, I whispered. His smile was slow, dangerous, satisfied. I'll pick you up at 7. I stumbled out of the SUV in a daze, climbed the 3 flights to my apartment, and collapsed on my bed, still wearing my scrubs. I fell asleep with the ghost of his touch on my skin, and woke 6 hours later to a knock on my door. A delivery man stood there, holding a box. Inside was a dress, emerald green silk that whispered like secrets, with a note in bold, slashing handwriting. For tomorrow, wear nothing else. D. My hands trembled as I held it up to the light. The fabric was so fine it was nearly transparent, So expensive I was afraid to touch it. This was insane. He was insane. I was insane for even considering. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. Sleep well, Emma. Dream of me. I did. God help me. I did. I spent the entire next day in a state of suspended disbelief, the dress hanging on my closet door like an accusation. Every time I passed it, the silk seemed to shimmer with promise and warning in equal measure. I told myself a dozen times I wouldn't wear it, wouldn't go, would text him, somehow, even though I didn't have his number, and cancel. But 7 o'clock found me standing in front of my cracked bathroom mirror, the green dress clinging to curves I didn't know I had, my hair falling in waves I'd spent an hour coaxing with a borrowed curling iron from my neighbor. I looked like someone else, someone who belonged in Dante's world. The buzzer rang at exactly 7. Not a minute early, not a second late. My hand shook as I grabbed my worn purse, so pathetically out of place with this dress, and headed downstairs. The SUV was there, sleek and black and impossible to ignore on my garbage-strewn street, but it was Dante standing beside it that made my breath catch. He wore charcoal gray tonight, the suit somehow both casual and devastatingly formal, his white shirt open at the collar, to reveal the column of his throat. His eyes tracked over me with an intensity that felt physical, and something predatory flickered in their depths. Beautiful, he murmured, taking my hand and bringing it to his lips. The kiss was barely there, just a whisper of heat against my knuckles, but it sent electricity racing up my arm. Though you ignored my instructions. I blinked. What? His gaze dropped pointedly to my purse, and a smile tugged at his mouth, not quite amused, not quite annoyed. I said wear nothing else. Heat flooded my face. I need my... No. He plucked the purse from my hands and handed it to the driver, who'd appeared silently at his elbow. Tonight, you need nothing but me. It should have sounded arrogant. Instead, it sounded like a promise. The restaurant was the kind of place I'd only seen in movies, all soft lighting and crystal chandeliers, where the prices weren't listed on the menu because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. The maitre d' practically bowed when he saw Dante, leading us to a private room where a single table sat beneath a skylight, the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky above. Mr. Salvatore, the maitre d' murmured, pulling out my chair. Everything is prepared as requested. Salvatore. So now I had a last name to go with the face that had haunted my dreams. Dante sat across from me, his phone, one of 3 on the table, buzzing softly. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening, then silenced all 3 with a gesture that seemed almost violent. Forgive me. Business has been demanding. What kind of business? I asked, then immediately regretted it when his eyes sharpened. Import and export, he said smoothly. Too smoothly. Family business. Very traditional, very Italian. Very boring to discuss over dinner. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table in a posture that should have been casual but somehow seemed calculated. Tell me about you instead. How does a woman end up working night shifts at a hospital, living in a neighborhood where the police don't even patrol after dark? The question was invasive, presumptuous, and yet I found myself answering. Maybe it was the wine he'd ordered without asking, deep red and tasting of cherries and smoke. Maybe it was the way he listened, his entire focus on me like I was the only person in the world. Maybe it was just that I was so damn tired of being invisible. I told him about my parents dying in a car accident when I was 19, about the student loans for a nursing degree I'd never finished, about the slow slide from paycheck to paycheck until I'd ended up here. Barely surviving, barely living. And yet you smile, he said softly, his hand reaching across the table to cover mine. His touch was warm, possessive, and I should have pulled away, but couldn't seem to make myself move. Why do you smile, Emma, when you have nothing to smile about? Because the alternative is crying, I whispered, staring at our joined hands. His was so much larger than mine, so much stronger, with scars across the knuckles that spoke of violence I couldn't imagine. And I'm tired of crying. Something shifted in his expression, softened and hardened simultaneously. You won't cry anymore, he said, and it sounded like a vow. Not while you're with me, The dinner passed in a blur of courses I couldn't name, each more exquisite than the last. Dante fed me bites from his own plate, his fingers brushing my lips, his eyes dark and hungry as he watched me taste flavors I'd never experienced. The wine kept flowing, and the room kept getting smaller, warmer, until it felt like we were the only two people in existence. "Dance with me," he said, when the dessert plates were cleared. And suddenly there was music, soft, slow, impossibly romantic. He stood, offering his hand, and when I took it, he pulled me against him with a possessiveness that stole my breath. We swayed in the empty room, his hand splayed across my lower back, his other holding mine against his chest where I could feel his heart beating, steady, strong, alive. He smelled like cedar and smoke and something uniquely him, and when he pressed his lips to my temple, I felt my knees weaken. "Come home with me," he breathed against my ear, and every nerve in my body ignited. I've never... God, how could I explain that I was 24 years old and had never done more than awkward fumbling with a boyfriend who'd left when things got hard? "I know," he murmured, his lips tracing down to my jaw. "I can see it in the way you blush, the way you tremble when I touch you. Your innocence is written all over you, Emma. And it makes me want you more." His honesty was devastating. "This is crazy," I whispered. "I don't even know you. Then get to know me." He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes, and what I saw there was raw, unfiltered hunger. "Spend the night with me. Let me show you what it means to be worshipped." Every rational thought screamed at me to refuse, to run, to protect myself from this man who was clearly dangerous, clearly out of my league, clearly hiding things I didn't want to know about. But his hand was in my hair, tilting my head back, and his mouth was a breath away from mine. And I was so tired of being invisible, of being nothing, of being alone. "Yes," I breathed, and his kiss was my reward. It started soft, almost gentle, his lips moving against mine with a patience that made my toes curl. But then I gasped, and he took advantage, his tongue sweeping into my mouth in a claiming that left no doubt about his intentions. He kissed like he did everything else, with absolute control and devastating thoroughness. And by the time he pulled back, I was clinging to him, my legs unable to support my weight. "My car," he growled against my lips, and then we were moving, his arm around my waist, practically carrying me through the restaurant where staff melted out of our path, their eyes carefully averted. The SUV was waiting, the driver holding the door open with a carefully blank expression. Dante bundled me inside, and the moment the door closed, his mouth was on mine again, hot and demanding, his hands sliding up my thighs, bunching the green silk around my hips. "Dante," I gasped, aware of the driver in the front seat, separated by only a thin partition. "He can't see," Dante murmured, his teeth grazing my neck. "And I don't care if he could. Let them all know you're mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed me. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in my belly, made me arch into his touch, made me forget every reason this was a terrible idea. The drive seemed to take hours and seconds simultaneously. By the time we pulled up to a building that looked more like a fortress than a home, all stone walls and iron gates, I was trembling with need and nerves. Dante's penthouse occupied the entire top floor, accessed by a private elevator that required a key card and a fingerprint scan. The security was excessive, paranoid even, but I was too dizzy with wine and want to care. The doors opened onto a space that was all dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, art on the walls that probably cost more than I'd make in a lifetime. But I barely noticed because Dante was pulling me against him, his mouth finding mine again, walking me backward toward a bedroom I glimpsed through an open doorway. "Last chance." He breathed against my lips, his hands framing my face. "Tell me to stop, Emma. Tell me this is too fast, too much. Tell me no, and I'll take you home, and we'll pretend this never happened." But I didn't want to pretend. For once in my miserable, invisible life, I wanted to be seen, to be wanted, to feel something other than exhaustion and fear and loneliness. "Don't stop," I whispered, and his smile was triumphant and tender all at once. What happened next was a blur of sensations. His hands removing my dress with practiced ease, his mouth on skin that had never been touched with such reverence, his voice whispering words in Italian I didn't understand but felt in my bones. He was gentle despite the hunger in his eyes, patient despite the tension in his body, and when he finally made me his, the brief pain was swallowed by pleasure so intense I cried out his name like a prayer. We moved together in the darkness, the city lights casting shadows across his face, and I saw something in his expression that terrified and thrilled me. Possession, obsession, a hunger that went beyond physical need. He looked at me like I was something precious, something he intended to keep, something that belonged to him and him alone. Mine, he growled as we shattered together, and I was too lost in ecstasy to argue. Afterward, I lay in his arms, my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. His fingers traced patterns on my bare shoulder, circles and lines that felt like he was writing his name on my skin. Stay, he murmured into my hair. Don't go back to that apartment, that job. Stay here, with me. I can't, I whispered, reality creeping back in. I have to work. I have bills, responsibilities. I'll take care of them. His arms tightened around me. I'll take care of you. You don't even know me. I know enough. He tilted my chin up, his eyes serious in the dim light. I know you deserve better than what you have. I know you're alone and afraid and too proud to ask for help. I know that from the moment I saw you, I wanted you. And what I want, Emma, I keep. It should have been romantic. Instead, it sounded like a threat, but I was too tired, too satisfied, too wrapped in silk sheets that probably cost more than my rent to protest. So I closed my eyes and let myself drift, telling myself this was just one night, just one perfect, impossible night, and in the morning I'd go back to my real life and this would become a beautiful memory. I was asleep when his phone rang, one of the 3 he'd left on the nightstand. I was asleep when he answered it in rapid Italian, his voice sharp with authority. I was asleep when he made a call that would seal both our fates, but I woke to the gray dawn and an empty bed, Dante's scent still on my skin, and a note on the pillow. Had to leave. Emergency. Car will take you wherever you want to go. Last night was not enough. I'll find you again. D. I dressed in my wrinkled green dress, took the elevator down where a different driver waited with the same carefully blank expression, and gave him my address. As we pulled away from the fortress, I told myself it was over, done, a beautiful mistake. I didn't know then that I was already carrying his child. I didn't know that 9 months later, everything would change again. 3 months passed before I admitted to myself that something was wrong. The exhaustion I'd blamed on double shifts didn't fade. The nausea that hit me every morning couldn't be explained by bad cafeteria food. And when I missed my second period, standing in the bathroom of my apartment with a pregnancy test trembling in my hands, I watched 2 pink lines appear and felt my entire world tilt sideways. Pregnant. I was pregnant with the child of a man I'd spent one night with, a man whose last name I barely knew, a man who disappeared from my life as completely as he'd entered it. I'd tried to find him. God, how I'd tried. I'd gone back to the restaurant, but they claimed they had no record of a Dante Salvatore. I'd searched online, but the name was too common, and the few images that came up showed men who were either too old or too young, or simply not him. It was as if he'd never existed. Except he had. And now I was carrying proof of that single reckless night. I cried for 3 days straight, then dried my tears and made a plan. I'd have this baby alone, just like I'd done everything else alone. I'd pick up extra shifts, save every penny, and somehow make it work. Women had been doing it for centuries. I could too. But pregnancy was expensive. The prenatal vitamins, the doctor's appointments, the maternity clothes I couldn't afford. It all added up faster than I could save. I worked until my feet swelled so badly I could barely walk, until my back ached with every step, until the other nurses started giving me concerned looks and suggesting I take it easy. I couldn't take it easy. Easy was a luxury for women who had someone to lean on. By my 7th month, I'd been forced to cut back to single shifts, my body simply unable to handle more. My savings dwindled to nothing. My electricity got shut off twice. I learned to eat cereal for every meal because it was cheap and filling and didn't require cooking. And every night, Alone in my dark apartment with my hands on my swollen belly, I thought about Dante, about the way he'd looked at me like I mattered, about the possessiveness in his voice when he'd called me his, about the promise he'd made to take care of me. A promise that had evaporated with the morning light. I hated him for that, hated him for making me hope, for making me feel, for leaving me with this precious, terrifying responsibility. But I also couldn't regret it, because this baby, this tiny, constant presence kicking against my ribs, was mine. The first thing that had ever been truly, completely mine. Labor started on a Tuesday night, exactly 9 months after that first collision on the sidewalk. I was at work, naturally, because I'd needed the money too desperately to take maternity leave any earlier than absolutely necessary. The first contraction hit while I was helping another mother through her delivery, a cramping sensation that stole my breath and made me grip the bed rail. "Emma?" Maria, one of the senior nurses, looked at me with alarm. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. But then another contraction hit, stronger this time, and the lie became impossible to maintain. They moved me to a delivery room, the same sterile space I'd worked in countless times, now seeing it from the other side. Maria stayed with me, holding my hand, coaching my breathing, being the support system I didn't have. But as the hours dragged on and the pain intensified, I'd never felt more alone. "There's no one we can call?" Maria asked during a brief reprieve, wiping sweat from my forehead. "No family, no boyfriend, no one," I gasped, and then another contraction hit, and I was screaming, begging for relief that wouldn't come. 23 hours later, at 4:47 in the morning, my daughter entered the world with a furious cry that made my heart explode with love so fierce it was painful. They placed her on my chest, tiny and perfect and absolutely mine, and I sobbed with exhaustion and joy and terror. "She's beautiful," Maria whispered, tears in her own eyes. "Have you thought of a name?" "Lucia," I breathed, the name coming from somewhere deep inside. "Her name is Lucia. Light. My little light in all this darkness." But the darkness wasn't finished with me yet. The complications started almost immediately. Excessive bleeding that wouldn't stop. My blood pressure dropping, alarms screaming. Maria's calm voice taking on an edge of panic as she called for the doctor. They took Lucia from my arms, my empty arms, and suddenly there were too many people in the room. Too many hands on my body. Too many urgent voices talking over each other. I heard words like hemorrhage and emergency surgery and possible hysterectomy, but they seemed to come from very far away, filtered through a fog that was rapidly closing in. I was so tired of fighting, of surviving, of being alone. Maybe it would be easier to just let go. "Emma, stay with me," Maria's voice cut through the fog. "Stay awake. Think about Lucia. She needs you." Lucia. My baby girl with no one but me. I fought. God, how I fought. Through the surgery, through the transfusions, through the touch-and-go hours where apparently I'd nearly died on the table. I fought my way back from the edge because my daughter needed her mother, and I'd be damned if I'd leave her as alone in this world as I'd been. 3 days later, I woke up in a recovery room, my body feeling like it had been torn apart and badly reassembled. Maria was there immediately, her smile bright with relief. "You scared us," she said, squeezing my hand. "But you're going to be okay. And Lucia is perfect. She's been in the NICU for observation, but she's strong like her mama." "I want to see her," I rasped, my throat raw from the breathing tube. "Soon," Maria promised. "But first, I need to tell you something. There's been a situation." My heart lurched. "Is she okay? Is Lucia—" "Lucia is fine," Maria assured me quickly. "It's not about her health. It's about Emma. When you were admitted, we needed information for your file. Emergency contacts, medical history, father's information for the birth certificate. You were unconscious, so we went through your belongings." Horror washed over me. "What did you—" "We found his business card. In your wallet." Maria's expression was strange, caught between concern and something that looked like fear. "Dante Salvatore. It had his private number on the back. Emma, do you know who he is?" The name hit me like a physical blow. "You called him," I whispered. "Oh God, you called him. We had to. You were dying, and there was a baby, and we needed Emma. He's on his way. He's been on his way since we called him 3 days ago. Apparently he's been searching for you for months." The room spun. No, you don't understand. He can't. I don't want... But it was too late. Because at that moment, the door opened, and Dante Salvatore walked into my room like an avenging angel. His face a mask of fury and fear, and something that looked dangerously like relief. He looked exactly as I remembered, tall and powerful and devastating, but there was something different about him now. Something harder, darker, more dangerous. He wore black again, his suit immaculate despite what must have been hours of travel. But his jaw was shadowed with stubble and his eyes were wild. Behind him came the security, 2 men who positioned themselves at the door, their hands inside their jackets, their eyes scanning the hallway with military precision. "Everyone out," Dante said, his voice low and deadly calm. "Now." Maria started to protest, but something in his expression made her reconsider. She squeezed my hand once more and fled, leaving me alone with the father of my child. For a long moment, Dante just stared at me, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled emotion. Then he moved, crossing the room in 3 strides, his hands framing my face with a gentleness that contradicted the violence in his eyes. "You had my child," he said. And it sounded like an accusation and a prayer combined. "You were pregnant with my daughter, and you didn't tell me. I couldn't find you," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I tried, Dante. I tried so hard, but you'd disappeared, and I thought you didn't want..." "Didn't want?" The word came out like a gunshot. His thumb wiped away my tears, but his hands were shaking. "Emma, I have been searching for you for 9 months. 9 months of hiring investigators, of checking every hospital in the city, of going mad wondering where you were, if you were safe, if you'd forgotten me as easily as I couldn't forget you. You left," I sobbed. "You left me a note and disappeared. I left because I had to handle a situation that required my immediate attention. A situation that, if not handled, would have put you in danger." His forehead pressed against mine, and I felt him trembling. "I came back 6 hours later, and you were gone. The driver said he'd taken you home, but when I went to your building, the landlord said you'd moved, left no forwarding address. I thought, God, Emma, I thought you'd run from me. I didn't move," I whispered. "I've been in the same apartment the whole time." His eyes closed, and I saw raw pain flash across his face. "Different building. You must have given him the wrong address, or he misheard, or... It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here, alive, and I have a daughter who is 3 days old, and I've missed..." His voice broke. "I've missed everything. Dante, where is she?" He pulled back, his eyes burning into mine. "Where is Lucia?" The fact that he already knew her name made my chest ache. "The NICU. She's in the NICU for observation, but she's healthy, strong." He was already moving, striding to the door, barking orders in Italian to his security. Within minutes, I was being transferred to a wheelchair against every hospital protocol, and wheeled toward the NICU with Dante's hand on my shoulder like a brand. The NICU staff tried to stop him, but one look at his face and they stepped aside. Hospital security was called, but Dante's men dealt with them with quiet efficiency while he stood at the viewing window, staring at the tiny infant in the second isolette from the left. "My daughter. Our daughter. She has your eyes," I whispered, wheeling closer. "And your nose. She's... Dante, she's perfect." He didn't respond. He just stood there, frozen, staring at Lucia with an expression that made my heart crack open. Then, without asking permission, without following protocol, he pushed through the NICU doors, my wheelchair following in his wake, and approached our daughter's isolette. His hands were shaking as he reached in, as he touched her tiny fist with one finger. Lucia's fingers closed around his instinctively, and I watched Dante Salvatore, this man who radiated power and danger, break apart completely. "Mine," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. My daughter. My family. And I realized, with terrible certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. Dante didn't leave the hospital. For 3 days, while I recovered and Lucia grew stronger, he maintained a constant presence. He moved me to a private suite, the kind reserved for celebrities and politicians, with round-the-clock nursing care and security posted at every entrance. He brought in specialists to examine both of us, the best doctors money could buy, their deference to him absolute and slightly terrifying. And he barely left Lucia's side. I watched him through the glass of the NICU, this powerful man reduced to helpless adoration by an infant who weighed barely 6 pounds. He'd stripped off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and learned to change diapers with the same focused intensity he probably applied to whatever import-export business he ran. The nurses taught him to bottle feed, and I watched him cradle our daughter with hands that trembled, whispering to her in Italian, making promises I couldn't hear, but somehow knew were absolute. He hasn't slept, Maria told me on the second day, bringing me lunch I couldn't eat. His men brought him fresh clothes, but he won't leave long enough to shower. Emma, I know this isn't my place, but who is he? Really? I wanted to say I didn't know, but that would have been a lie. Because in those 3 days, I'd done what I should have done 9 months ago. I'd researched Dante Salvatore. What I found made my blood run cold. He wasn't just wealthy. He wasn't just powerful. Dante Salvatore was the head of one of the largest organized crime families on the East Coast, a man whose name was whispered in connection with everything from legitimate real estate empires to decidedly illegitimate activities that made my nurse's training scream in horror. There were articles about federal investigations that went nowhere, prosecutors who mysteriously dropped cases, witnesses who disappeared. He was dangerous, possibly evil, definitely not someone who should be anywhere near my daughter. And yet, when he looked at Lucia, I saw something in his eyes that I recognized. The same desperate love I felt, the same fierce protectiveness, the same willingness to burn the world down to keep her safe. On the 4th day, the doctors cleared us for discharge. I was healing well, Lucia was thriving, and it was time to go home to my tiny apartment with its broken heater and questionable electrical wiring. Time to face reality. Dante had other plans. "You're not going back there," he said, standing in my room with his arms crossed, his expression brooking no argument. Behind him, his security watched the hallway with their usual vigilance. "Excuse me?" I struggled to sit up, my body still sore from surgery. "I live there. It's my home. It's a death trap in a war zone." His voice was flat, factual. "The building has code violations going back 15 years. There's black mold in the walls. 3 people were shot on that block last month alone. You're not taking my daughter there. She's my daughter too," I shot back, anger flaring. "And I don't have anywhere else to go, Dante. Some of us don't have penthouses and private security, and you do now." He moved closer, sitting on the edge of my bed with a casual possessiveness that made my breath catch. "You have everything now, Emma. You and Lucia both. I've already had your things moved." The words took a moment to register. "You what?" "Your belongings, what little there was, have been packed and moved to my home. Your apartment has been paid off. Your landlord compensated for early termination of the lease. You won't be going back." Rage and fear warred in my chest. You don't get to make decisions for me. I don't care how much money you have or who you are. You can't just... I can." His hand covered mine, gentle but immovable, "And I will. Emma, I have spent 9 months searching for you. 9 months going out of my mind, wondering if you were safe, if you were eating, if you were thinking about me the way I couldn't stop thinking about you. And now I find out you were pregnant, with my child, living in squalor, working yourself to exhaustion, nearly dying in childbirth because you couldn't afford proper prenatal care." "I had prenatal care," I protested weakly, "at a free clinic where you waited hours to see a different doctor every visit." His jaw clenched. "I know everything now, Emma. I know about the shut-off notices, the empty refrigerator, the shifts you worked up until the day you went into labor. I know you almost died because your body was too malnourished, too exhausted to handle the stress of delivery." Shame burned through me. I did the best I could. I know. His thumb stroked over my knuckles. And it breaks my heart. But you don't have to do your best anymore. You don't have to struggle or suffer or be alone. Let me take care of you. Both of you. I don't want to be taken care of, I whispered. But even I could hear the lie in my voice. I want to take care of myself, then think of it as taking care of Lucia. He leaned closer, his scent wrapping around me like smoke. She deserves better than that apartment. She deserves safety, comfort, opportunity. She deserves a father who will give her the world. Are you really going to deny her that because of pride? The words hit like arrows, each one finding its mark, because he was right. God help me. He was right. I could barely afford to feed myself, let alone a baby. I had no savings, no support system, no way to provide the life my daughter deserved. This is temporary, I said finally, hating how defeated I sounded, just until I get back on my feet, find a better job, save some money. Then Lucia and I will get our own place. Something dark flickered in Dante's eyes, something possessive and slightly cruel. Of course, he said smoothly. Whatever you want, Emma. But I knew he was lying, just like I knew I was lying to myself. The penthouse hadn't changed, but my perception of it had. What I'd seen as luxury 9 months ago now looked like a fortress. Security cameras in every corner, bulletproof windows, doors that required fingerprint and retinal scans. The art on the walls was beautiful, and probably priceless. But I couldn't shake the feeling that some of it had been purchased with blood money Dante had prepared for us. A nursery had been set up in the room next to his bedroom, all soft creams and gentle blues, with a crib that probably cost more than my annual salary, and a rocking chair positioned perfectly to catch the morning light. There were clothes in the dresser, diapers and formula stocked in quantities that suggested he'd bought out an entire store, toys and books and everything a baby could possibly need. When did you do all this? I asked, standing in the doorway with Lucia sleeping in my arms. While you were in surgery. He came up behind me, his presence warm and overwhelming. I called my sister, told her I had a daughter, and she handled everything. She wants to meet you both when you're ready. The casual mention of family made my stomach clench. Does she know that you're the woman I've been searching for? Yes. His hand settled on my lower back, familiar and possessive. Does she know we're not married, that we barely know each other? Also, yes. She's concerned. But she'll love you once she meets you. Dante, I don't think... You should rest, he interrupted, gently guiding me toward the rocking chair. You're still healing. Let me take her. Before I could protest, he'd lifted Lucia from my arms with practiced ease, cradling her against his chest like she was made of spun glass. He sat in the chair with her, rocking gently, his huge frame somehow perfect for this small, tender task. Go, he said softly, not looking away from Lucia's sleeping face. Shower, eat, sleep in a real bed. I have her. I wanted to argue, to insist I was fine, but my body betrayed me with a wave of exhaustion so profound I swayed on my feet. Dante's eyes flicked to me, sharpening with concern. Now, Emma, it wasn't a request. The master bedroom was exactly as I remembered. All dark wood and masculine elegance, dominated by a bed that could sleep 4. Someone had laid out clothes for me, expensive things with tags still attached, all in my size. In the bathroom, I found luxury skincare products, plush towels, and a shower with enough settings to launch a spacecraft. I stood under the hot water until my skin turned pink, washing away days of hospital smell and fear and exhaustion. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that was softer than anything I'd ever owned, I found Dante standing in the bedroom, still holding Lucia. She won't settle, he said, frustration evident. I think she's hungry. Despite everything, I smiled. She's breastfeeding. Or trying to. The lactation consultant said it might take time since she was in the NICU, but... Then feed her. He crossed to me, placing our daughter in my arms. I'll order dinner. It should have been awkward, sitting on Dante's bed in nothing but a towel, nursing our daughter while he made calls in rapid Italian from the doorway, but somehow it felt natural, right? Like this was exactly where we were meant to be. Lucia latched on after a few tries, and the relief was physical. As she nursed, I studied her tiny features, the dark wisps of hair, the perfect bow of her mouth, the way her little hand clutched at my finger like she never wanted to let go. "You're beautiful together," Dante said softly, and I looked up to find him watching us with an expression that made my chest ache. Like a Renaissance painting. Madonna and child. "I'm hardly a Madonna," I said, trying for levity. "I'm just a girl who made a mistake." His expression darkened. "Don't call her that. Don't call what we created, what we made together, a mistake." "That's not what I meant. I meant I struggled to find the words. Dante, this is all so overwhelming. 9 months ago, we spent one night together. One night, and now we're living together, raising a child together, and I don't even know your favorite color or if you like coffee or—" "Blue," he said, moving to sit beside me on the bed. "My favorite color is blue, the exact shade of your eyes when you're about to cry. I take my coffee black, 2 sugars. I hate mushrooms, love opera, and have a scar on my back from a knife fight when I was 17. His hand cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. "I know you bite your lip when you're nervous, that you hum while you work, that you have a small birthmark behind your right knee. I know you prefer tea to coffee, that you read romance novels when you think no one's watching, that you cry during sad commercials. How could you possibly? Because I've been obsessed with you since the moment you smiled at me at that fundraiser." His voice was raw, honest. "Because I've spent 9 months learning everything I could about you, because you're mine, Emma, and I take care of what's mine." There was that word again, mine. It should have frightened me, should have sent me running. Instead, it sent warmth pooling through my chest. Dangerous and addictive. "I'm not a possession," I whispered. "No," he agreed, his lips brushing my forehead. "You're my family, and I protect my family with everything I have." Later, after Lucia had been fed and changed and settled in her crib with a baby monitor that probably had military-grade encryption, after I'd eaten the gourmet meal Dante's personal chef had prepared, after exhaustion had finally driven me to bed, I lay in the darkness and wondered what I'd gotten myself into. Dante had insisted I take his bed, while he slept in one of the guest rooms, but I could feel his presence in every corner of the space, his scent on the pillows, his clothes in the closet, his life surrounding me like a cage made of silk and lies. Through the monitor, I could hear Lucia's soft breathing, steady and reassuring. She was safe. She was warm. She was loved. And I was trapped. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, as I drifted off to sleep in sheets that cost more than my old rent, I felt something that might have been relief. Or maybe surrender. I wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. The first week in Dante's penthouse passed in a blur of feedings and diaper changes and sleepless nights that somehow felt less exhausting than my old life. Maybe it was the help, the night nurse Dante had hired despite my protests, the chef who prepared nutritious meals designed to help me heal, the housekeeper who cleaned and did laundry and never made me feel like a burden. Or maybe it was just that I wasn't alone anymore. Dante was there for every middle-of-the-night crying session, every moment of new parent panic when Lucia's breathing seemed too quiet or too fast or just wrong. He'd appear in the nursery doorway, disheveled and beautiful in sweatpants and a t-shirt that did nothing to hide the muscular planes of his body, and take our daughter from my trembling hands with a competence that should have been impossible for someone so new to fatherhood. "Sleep," he'd murmur, already rocking Lucia against his chest. "I've got her." And I'd stumble back to bed, too exhausted to argue, and wake hours later to find him still in the rocking chair, our daughter asleep on his chest, his hand protective on her tiny back. He was a good father. The realization should have been reassuring. But instead, it terrified me. Because the better he was with Lucia, the harder it would be to leave. And I had to leave eventually, didn't I? This arrangement was temporary. I was just getting back on my feet, except I wasn't looking for jobs. Wasn't searching for apartments. Wasn't planning an exit strategy. I was falling into a routine that felt dangerously permanent. It was on the 8th day that everything changed. I woke to raised voices coming from Dante's office, his door closed but not quite shut. The words in Italian, but the tone unmistakable. Anger, threat, violence barely leashed. Lucia was with the nurse for her morning feeding, so I crept closer, my heart pounding. Non mi importa quali scuse ha. Dante's voice was ice and rage. He stole from my family. He endangered what's mine. There's only one way this ends. A pause, then. Yes. Tonight, make it clean. I don't want Emma to know. My blood turned to ice water. Whatever Dante was involved in, whatever dark business he conducted behind closed doors, it was worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just money laundering or illegal gambling. This was murder, spoken about as casually as planning dinner. I backed away from the door, my hands shaking, and nearly collided with a man I'd never seen before. He was older than Dante, with silver at his temples and a scar that bisected his left cheek. And the gun at his hip wasn't even bothered to be concealed. Mrs. Salvatore, he said with a slight bow, his English accented. You should not be listening at doors. We're not, I couldn't form a coherent sentence. The office door opened, and Dante stood there, his expression hardening when he saw me. Matteo, give us a moment. The scarred man disappeared like smoke, and suddenly I was being pulled into the office, the door closing behind us with an ominous click. How much did you hear? Dante asked, his voice carefully neutral. Enough. I wrenched my arm from his grip. Enough to know you're planning to kill someone. Enough to know I've been living with a murderer. Enough to know I need to take Lucia and go where? He moved closer, and I backed up until I hit the desk. Back to your apartment that no longer exists? Back to a job that barely paid your rent? Back to being alone and desperate and one emergency away from disaster? Better that than this. I gestured wildly at the office, at him, at everything. Better than living with a man who casually orders executions over breakfast. The man I'm dealing with tonight kidnapped and tortured a 14-year-old boy to send a message to his father. Dante's voice was quiet, deadly. He's a human trafficker, Emma. He sells children. And yes, I'm going to kill him. Does that make me a monster in your eyes? I wanted to say yes, wanted to maintain my moral high ground. But the image of a 14-year-old boy being tortured made my stomach turn. You're still talking about murder, I whispered. I'm talking about justice. He cupped my face, forcing me to look at him. The world I operate in doesn't have courts or lawyers or due process. It has rules. And when those rules are broken, there are consequences. That man broke our most sacred rule. You don't touch children. Ever. And for that, he'll pay the price. Our rules? Our family? I pulled away from him. I'm not part of your world, Dante. I never agreed to be. You became part of it the moment you had my child. His expression was implacable. Like it or not, Emma, you're a Salvatore now. You're under my protection, which means you're also under my authority. And that means accepting who I am and what I do. I never agreed to marry you. Not yet. The words hung in the air like a threat. But you will. Before I could respond, his phone rang. One of the three he always carried. He answered it in Italian, his expression darkening with each word. Then he was moving, grabbing a jacket from the closet, checking a gun I hadn't known was there. Stay here, he ordered, already heading for the door. Matteo will be outside. Don't leave the penthouse. Don't answer the door for anyone. Don't... What's happening? Fear overrode my anger. He paused at the door, and when he looked back at me, I saw something raw and vulnerable beneath the control. Someone knows about you and Lucia. They're threatening to target you to get to me. I need to handle this now before... He stopped, his jaw clenching. I will keep you safe, both of you. I swear it. Then he was gone, and I was left alone with Matteo stationed outside the door and terror clawing at my chest. The next 6 hours were the longest of my life. I stayed in the nursery with Lucia, holding her close, jumping at every sound. The nurse tried to take her for her nap, but I couldn't let go, couldn't stop thinking about what Dante had said. Someone knows. Someone is threatening us, my daughter. Someone was threatening my daughter because of who her father was. When Dante finally returned, it was nearly midnight. I heard the elevator. the low murmur of voices, then his footsteps approaching the nursery. I looked up from the rocking chair where I'd been keeping vigil, and my breath caught. He was covered in blood. "It's not mine," he said immediately, seeing my expression. "Emma, I'm not hurt." But I was already moving, laying Lucia in her crib and crossing to him, my hands trembling as I reached for him. He caught my wrists before I could touch his shirt. "Don't. I need to shower first. Change. I don't want her to—" He glanced at Lucia, sleeping peacefully, and something in his expression cracked. "I don't want her to see me like this." I followed him to the master bathroom, watching as he stripped off the ruined clothes, expensive fabric now destroyed, destined for incineration, probably. There were bruises blooming across his ribs, a cut on his temple, evidence of violence even if the blood wasn't his. "Is it done?" I asked as he stepped into the shower. "It's done." He turned on the water, and I watched the blood swirl down the drain, pink and then clear. "They're all gone. The threat is eliminated. You're safe." "For how long?" I leaned against the counter, exhaustion making me bold. "How long until the next threat, the next enemy? The next person who thinks they can get to you through us?" He didn't answer immediately, just stood under the spray with his head bowed. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "I can't promise there won't be threats. This life, my life, it comes with dangers I can't eliminate entirely. But I can promise I will die before I let anyone hurt you or Lucia. I can promise that I will use every resource, every connection, every ounce of power I have to keep you safe." "That's not enough." Tears streamed down my face. "I can't live like this, Dante. Constantly afraid, constantly wondering if today is the day someone comes for us. I can't raise Lucia in a world where her father comes home covered in blood." He shut off the water and stepped out, wrapping a towel around his waist. When he looked at me, his eyes were raw with emotion. "Then what do you want me to do? Walk away? Abandon my daughter? Pretend I don't love you both so much it physically hurts?" The words hung in the air between us. "You don't love me," I whispered. "You barely know me." "I've loved you since that first night," he said fiercely, closing the distance between us. "Since before that, if I'm honest. Since you smiled at me at that fundraiser and looked at me like I was just a man, not a monster or a meal ticket or a stepping stone. You saw me, Emma. Really saw me. And I've been yours ever since you left." The old hurt bubbled up. "You made love to me and left before I woke up. Because I'm an idiot who thought he had time to handle one crisis before coming back to claim what was his." His hands framed my face, gentle despite the violence they'd committed hours ago. "I thought I had forever to court you properly, to make you fall for me the way I'd fallen for you. I didn't realize you'd slip through my fingers, that I'd spend 9 months in hell thinking I'd lost you." "You did lose me," I said, but the words lacked conviction. "No." His thumb brushed away my tears. "You're right here. You and Lucia both. My family, my world. And I'm not letting go again. I can't. I'm afraid," I confessed. "Of you. Of this life. Of what it means for Lucia." "Then be afraid," he interrupted. "Be terrified. Be furious. Hate me if you need to. But stay. Stay. And let me prove that I can be what you need. That I can give you and Lucia everything. Safety, security, love, all of it. And if I can't accept what you do, if I can't live with the violence, then I'll find a way to minimize your exposure to it." He pressed his forehead to mine. "I'll keep that part of my life separate from our home. You'll never have to see blood on my hands again. But Emma, I can't change who I am. I can't walk away from my responsibilities to my family, the organization. All I can do is promise to always come home to you." It wasn't enough. It shouldn't have been enough, but when he kissed me, desperate and pleading and full of promises he might not be able to keep, I kissed him back, because I loved him too. God help me. I'd fallen in love with this dangerous, complicated man who killed people and changed diapers with equal competence. Who looked at our daughter like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. who looked at me like I was worth dying for. "Marry me," he breathed against my lips, "not because you have to, not because of Lucia, but because you want to, because you love me even though you shouldn't. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you." I should have said no, should have demanded time, space, therapy probably. Should have been the strong, independent woman who didn't need a man, especially not a criminal, to complete her. But I was tired of should, tired of struggling alone, tired of pretending I didn't want exactly what he was offering: protection, partnership, love. "Yes," I whispered, and his smile was blinding. 6 months later, the wedding was small, just family and a few trusted associates. Dante's sister Sophia cried through the entire ceremony, clutching her husband's hand, while her 3 children served as flower girl and ring bearers. Matteo stood as Dante's best man, his scarred face softening when he looked at Lucia, who Maria held in the front row. I wore white, a simple dress that felt like armor and vulnerability combined. And when Dante slipped the ring onto my finger, I saw his hand tremble. "You're stuck with me now," I murmured, as we were pronounced husband and wife. "Thank God," he breathed, and kissed me like he was sealing a vow more binding than any legal contract. The reception was held at the penthouse, transformed by Sophia's expert planning into something magical. Lucia wore a tiny dress that matched mine, passed between relatives who cooed over her and spoke rapid Italian that I was slowly learning. Dante kept his hand on my lower back all night, possessive and protective, introducing me as my wife, with a pride that made my heart swell. Later, after the guests had left and Lucia was asleep in her nursery, Dante led me to the master bedroom, our bedroom now, and made love to me with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. "I love you," he whispered against my skin. "My wife. My Emma. Mine." "Yours," I agreed, and meant it. The life wasn't perfect. There were still nights when he came home late, smelling of smoke and secrets. Still moments when I saw the darkness in his eyes and wondered what he'd done. Still fears that kept me awake, imagining threats I couldn't prevent. But there were also mornings when I woke to find him watching Lucia sleep, his expression soft with wonder, afternoons when the 3 of us would lie on the floor, letting our daughter crawl between us, her giggles filling the penthouse with light. Evenings when Dante would pull me onto his lap and tell me about his day, the parts he could share, and I'd tell him about mine. We were a family, unconventional, complicated, probably doomed by every standard metric. But we were happy. And when Lucia took her first steps at 10 months old, walking straight into her father's waiting arms while he laughed with pure joy, I knew I'd made the right choice. This man, this dangerous, devoted, impossibly complicated man, was exactly where I was meant to be. "I love you," I told him that night, lying in the darkness with his arms around me. "I know," he murmured into my hair. "You tell me every day with how you look at me, how you trust me with our daughter, how you've built a life with me despite every reason not to. You're braver than you think, Emma Salvatore." "Mrs. Salvatore," I corrected with a smile. "I'm Mrs. Salvatore now." "Yes, you are." His arms tightened around me, mine forever, just like I promised. And in the nursery down the hall, Lucia slept peacefully, safe in the fortress her father had built, loved by parents who'd found each other in the most unlikely way. We weren't perfect, but we were real. We were family, and that was enough.